It's safe to say that the Elder Scrolls franchise is one of the biggest names in gaming. After all, the announcement of a Skyrim Remastered Edition at this year's E3 was met with plenty of enthusiasm, even though the game is only 5 years old. That's because developer Bethesda Softworks has provided players with a densely packed open-world experience, full of exploration and charm that few games can match. It hasn't always been this way, though. Sure, The Elder Scrolls has always had its fans, but it's rare to find someone that has actually played every game in the series. So join me on a journey of adventure, fantasy, and bugs. Lots and lots of bugs. This is the history of Elder Scrolls. Bethesda Softworks wasn't always the Western RPG masters we think of them as. Their first ever game was Gridiron, a football game for the Atari ST in 1986. For the next decade, they would go on to make a series of Wayne Gretzky hockey games, an NCAA basketball game, several Terminator games on the MS-DOS, and Home Alone for the NES. In 1993, designers Ted Peterson and Vijay Lakshman, along with programmer Julian LeFay, came together to start working on the studio's first action role-playing game. The three were longtime fans of pencil and paper role-playing games, as well as Ultima Underworld, a popular first-person dungeon crawler created by Looking Glass Studios. The game they came up with was Arena, a medieval-style gladiator game where the player would travel around the world, fighting in different arenas in a tournament until they became the grand champion. However, over the course of development, more emphasis was put on side quests. RPG elements were added, along with locations outside of the arenas, including cities and dungeons. At this point, the tournament concept had been dropped altogether, and the game had become a full-blown RPG. The name Arena didn't really fit anymore, but unfortunately all the marketing material had already been printed, so Bethesda founder Christopher Weaver came up with a title to put in front of it. Released on March 25th, 1994, The Elder Scrolls Arena was a first-person computer role-playing game. Taking place in the continent of Tamriel, the game was on an impressive scope and scale, using a combination of crafted towns and dungeons mixed with randomly generated content. The game map had no borders and generated infinitely, meaning you could wander around forever if you wanted. Arena features many elements we see in the series today. There are multiple classes with different combat styles, you can pickpocket and break stores.
Not me.
It was also one of the first games to have a day-night cycle, which added a sense of realism to its large world. There was a main quest, optional quests, and plenty of dungeons to explore. The game was met with mixed reception. Its visually impressive graphics for the time made it too demanding for a lot of players' machines, and it was filled with general bugs and jank. Some things never change, huh? And while the game was certainly impressive in its scope and scale, it took many of its ideas from games that came before it. Even designer Ted Peterson said that they weren't doing anything too new. The game was also infamously difficult, especially to players new to the genre. One player, Ken Rolston, said he started the game around 20 times and only got out of the starting dungeon once. Ken would later go on to join Bethesda and become the lead designer of Morrowind. But despite all of its issues, the game was a hit with PC role-playing fans, and it would be only 2 years later that Bethesda would release a follow-up.
"400 years after Tiber Septim's reign, the beginning will meet the end, and the bloody circle will close in the Empire of Tamriel. The unworthy heirs of the Septim dynasty have allowed the bonds of the Empire to weaken and crack. Uriel Septim the Seventh cannot repair what his ancestors ignored. The provinces fight among themselves like neglected children, drunk with rebellion, and one indomitable power hides itself, but not forever."
The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall was released on August 31st, 1996. Daggerfall introduced many systems into the Elder Scrolls formula that the series is now well known for. For the first time, you could join a guild, allowing access to quests and earning reputation. Aligning yourself with a faction would have a tangible effect, as NPCs would now react to your status and affiliation in the world. Players could create custom spells and enchant equipment. You could ride a horse, buy a house, you could become a vampire, a werewolf, or even a wereboar, which sounds totally awesome, and they should really bring that one back. Daggerfall also went even larger in its scale, with Bethesda boasting that the world was the size of Great Britain. It features over 1,500 towns and dungeons and over 7,500,000 NPCs. It's, as of this recording, one of the largest maps in all of video games at around 62,000 square miles, or at least until No Man's Sky comes out with its supposed 2 to the power of 64 planets. Of course, most of the map was randomly generated using pre-built assets, and as such, a lot of the world feels monotonous, a complaint that would directly influence the design of the next game. Daggerfall shows a lot of the interactive open-world vision that the Elder Scrolls would eventually become. Its scale and scope were impressive, but starting to get ahead of the technology at the time. Like with Arena, Daggerfall was a buggy mess, leaving consumers upset. The amount of time Bethesda spent on patches for the game left them wanting to be more cautious for future releases. By the way, if you visit the official Elder Scrolls website, you can download Arena and Daggerfall for free if you're curious to try them. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind was released 6 years after Daggerfall on May 1st, 2002. It's the first main game in the series to be directed by Todd Howard, who nowadays is the face of Bethesda. It was also the introduction to what would be the series' iconic main theme. The free-form world design that Arena and Daggerfall strive for was now fully realized. Once off the boat at the beginning of the game, you were free to go and do whatever you wanted. Much more emphasis was put on exploring than the main story. In fact, the story weaved itself with guilds, organizations, and various locations so that players were guaranteed to see and interact with the game's other elements. It even forces you at points to take a break in the main quest and engage in guild activities, side quests, or good old-fashioned bandit killing.
There is no escape!
Your journal would fill in with important details and observations, but Morrowind had no quest log or arrow telling you where to go. You had to ask for directions, follow signposts, and engage with the world around you. The map only filled in as you explored, and fast travel wasn't a thing, meaning you had to take public transit like everyone else. This all worked because of how the island of Vardenfell was designed. Bethesda scaled back the insane size of the previous games, providing a much smaller map, but everything was made by hand rather than random generation. Instead of every town looking the same, each had its own unique identity, and over the course of the game you would learn and memorize the layout of the world the same way you do with the area you live in real life. Morrowind was also when the series started to develop its own original aesthetic, moving away from medieval European and choosing to take elements from Egyptian, Japanese, and Middle Eastern cultures. The ecosystem is much more strange and out there, with giant mushrooms, and instead of riding horses you rode these things. Morrowind was the first game in the series to have expansions. The first Tribunal, in addition to its added story, is noteworthy for improving the interface and cleaning up the game's journal with an actual quest log. The second, Blood Moon, sold itself on the main hook of bringing back werewolves, which was absent from the main game. Morrowind also had a release on the original Xbox, which came out 6 months later. It actually sold very well, and it's a decent version of the game, but the PC version was still the way to go. That's because Morrowind was the first Elder Scrolls game to introduce mods, something the series is now well known for. With over 3,000 mods available today, there are some fantastic user creations that add new content, as well as quality of life mods that keep Morrowind current and approachable for more modern players. While Arena and Daggerfall are interesting historical curiosities, Morrowind is a game I'd actually recommend new players go back and play. Its lack of any handholding may be off-putting to some, but the satisfaction of exploration and discovery is some of the best in gaming. Just maybe go put on some of those graphic mods first. Morrowind was the realization of what its predecessors tried to achieve, and Bethesda had cemented themselves as the people to give an open-world RPG experience that no one else was providing. But it wasn't until the next game that it would reach a much wider audience.
Come on, fight!
This is the 27th of Last Seed, the year of Akatosh 433. These are the closing days of the Third Era, and the final hours of my life.
Released on March 20th, 2006, I remember The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion being a pretty big deal when it came out. Unlike Morrowind's Xbox release, Oblivion came out on the PC and Xbox 360 at the same time, with the Xbox 360 version getting just as much, if not more, attention. It was the first introduction to this style of game for many console players, including myself. Its release during the early days of the 360's lifespan was perfect timing. Console players were hungry for pretty much any game, and a 300-hour RPG was just the thing people were looking for. It also didn't hurt to have the voice of Patrick Stewart.
Find him and close shut the jaws of Oblivion.
The voice acting was actually a pretty big deal for Oblivion. Other main characters got celebrity voices as well, such as Sean Bean, but more importantly, every character in the game was now fully voiced. It was an incredibly impressive feat for a game of this scale at the time, but unfortunately there was only 12 voices for the game's hundreds of NPCs, leading to infamously repeated lines, characters having conversations with themselves, and a weird cookie-cutter feel to some of the dialogue.
Thank you, kind sir. Hard to complain about living in Coral. We've got everything you need.
Oblivion's main hook was the Oblivion Gates, portals to a demonic hell dimension that you must close. 50 of them would randomly appear in the world, and while it did get repetitive eventually, it was pretty cool the first time you were walking around and, hey wait, why is the sky getting red? Oh there's a portal to hell. The story felt a little more separated from the rest of the game than Morrowind's was, but Guild's got a much larger emphasis this time around, each with a full storyline and memorable quests. There's even an arena quest line, which is a nice callback to the original premise of the first game. Took them 12 years, but they finally put in that gladiatorial combat. Being my first Elder Scrolls game, I have a fondness for Oblivion's memorable characters like the Adoring Fan or Lucian LeChance.
For the slaying of Rufio was the signing of a covenant, the manner of execution, your signature. Rufio's blood, the ink.
Or how about its inventive quest design like Whodunit, a fancy mansion party turned murder mystery where mistrust spreads as everyone starts slowly dying. Except that you're the one killing everyone.
We did it, my friend. The killer is dead, and this nightmare is just about over. All we have to do now is find a way out of here. Ooh!
Oblivion took a little bit of a different approach to its world design than Morrowind. The game takes place in Cyrodiil, home of the Imperial City at the center of the continent of Tamriel. By the way, the city itself is in the middle of the map and makes for an impressive visual landmark. By being set in the hub of the Empire, it's really a melting pot of different races and cultures, and each region and city feels different. However, Oblivion also features the return to a more medieval aesthetic, and this left some Morrowind fans lament the loss of originality found in the previous game. Some of the repetitive feel of the older games started to creep back in as well, specifically in the dungeon designs. Once you've seen one Ayleid ruin, you've seen them all. This was apparently due to the fact that there was only one dungeon designer for the game's 200+ dungeons. Oblivion is also a much more accessible game than its predecessors. A proper quest log and navigational arrow was added, and you can instantly travel to any of the 9 major cities at the start of the game, giving players more access from the start and less time wandering around. Some PC players complained that it felt like the game was more designed for console casual players in mind because of this, as well as UI design that seemed more designed for controllers. Oblivion was one of the first games to embrace the concept of DLC, releasing a variety of content from new player homes, dungeons, and of course the infamous horse armor, which is now a shining example of DLC gone horribly wrong. There was also a small 10-hour plus expansion adding a new faction quest called Knights of the Nine, and a full expansion, Shivering Isles, which added a whole new area, full story, enemies, equipment, and the like. The idea of DLC was still a new unproven market at the time, and Bethesda was willing to experiment with every style and size of content to see what worked. And if you didn't care for these paid add-ons, modding for Oblivion was even bigger than Morrowind. New content, graphic updates, UI changes, and my personal favorite, the unofficial Oblivion patch, which fixes over 2,500 bugs and has now become an annual mod tradition for new Bethesda games. Oblivion has its problems, and for some it couldn't live up to the magic of Morrowind, but there's no denying the impact it had on introducing a whole new group of players to Bethesda's unique brand of RPG. 2008 would see Bethesda taking the Elder Scrolls design model and applying it to the Fallout franchise. Fallout 3 was a fantastic game, but for some people it was just a stopgap until the next Elder Scrolls. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim was released on 1/1/1111. Set in the snowy region of Skyrim, you play as the Dragonborn, a legendary hero who must defeat the returning dragons and harness their powers. I think my favorite thing about Skyrim is how bombastically epic it presents itself. It uses the Norse mythology and Viking inspirations perfectly. This is a game about rugged warriors traversing harsh environments and slaying dragons. That dragon then bursts into flames and you steal its soul, and then you use that soul to give you the ability to shout people off a cliff. Everything just feels bigger in Skyrim. Dungeons are imposing ruins atop mountains, giants roam the land, and combat feels a lot more active with flashier animations. The combat was actually one of the most notable improvements. It always felt a little stiff in the previous games, and it was now much more dynamic and satisfying. You could now pick which hand you would equip something in, meaning you could do things like dual-wielding weapons, combining a weapon with magic, or dual-wielding magic. Of course, the dragons are the game's big feature, and they're pulled off pretty well. There was a real threat to having one show up at any time, which means you had to stay on your toes.
Speak, elf. Just a pilgrim. I'd prefer to leave it at that, if you don't mind. Walking the steps, meditating on the emblems. I make this trip every few years.
The battles themselves were pretty intense, and it was pretty satisfying when you take one down. Once you do beat one, it served the purpose of providing you with a dragon soul, a currency which you could spend on unlocking shouts, special magical powers that you learn by finding ancient word walls throughout the world. This gave you a pretty good mechanical hook to want to go explore the game's dungeons and slay as many dragons as possible. Skyrim was, and still is, a great looking game, but like with Daggerfall, the game's ambition was starting to get ahead of its tech. The Elder Scrolls games have always been buggy, and while I'm not sure which game ranks as the most buggy, Skyrim was sort of the tipping point for a lot of people where they felt like the series was running out of excuses. Regardless of Skyrim's shortcomings though, the popularity for the game exploded in a way previous games did not, selling over 22 million copies to date, making it one of the best-selling games of all time. I was a freshman in college when this came out, and for a whole month you couldn't walk through the halls without overhearing someone talk about Skyrim. Many a GPA was ruined that fall. Skyrim also had an enduring popularity, helped by the game's healthy modding community. It was one of the first games to use Steam Workshop, allowing for a whole new group of players to find and install mods at the push of a button.
I'm gonna get you!
The game also had 3 official add-ons. There's Dawnguard, an expansion about vampires. The second was a much smaller add-on called Hearthfire, which lets you build and customize your own home, even adopting orphan children. Fun fact, the popularity of Hearthfire is what influenced the settlement building feature in Fallout 4. And finally there was Dragonborn, which had you visit the same island from the Morrowind add-on Blood Moon, which is a nice bit of fan service. Daggerfall may still hold the crown for biggest Elder Scrolls game, but Skyrim is certainly the most ambitious. And while there's not even close to enough time in this video to talk about all the things that make this series so great and endearing for people, I think one of the reasons is because it's not afraid to do new things. Each has its own look and feel, and Bethesda Softworks really does listen to fan feedback and tries to address it in the next game. Daggerfall was too large and repetitive, so Morrowind was smaller and handmade. Morrowind was too hardcore for a general audience, so Oblivion is more friendly and inviting. Oblivion was a little too generic, so Skyrim is more unique and epic. I have no doubt that whatever The Elder Scrolls 6 will end up being, it's not just gonna be Skyrim 2, but a completely new experience for players to enjoy that is still undeniably The Elder Scrolls. So thank you for watching this brief look at the history of the Elder Scrolls franchise. I would really talk about these games all day if they let me. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go play some more Elder Scrolls.